Welcome to Michigan Reimagined, presented by T.A. Forsberg and Waggoner Financial. And here's your host, Chris Buck.
So trying to track the economy in a post-COVID world is pretty complex, and nothing seems certain or logical. Luckily, we have some professionals who live in this space and share their research. Please welcome the managing partner for Waggoner Financial, Mr. Eric Waggoner. Welcome back to the show.
Great to be here, Chris.
So, for those who want to hear more about Waggoner Financial specifically, you can go archive the many conversations I've had with Eric. But in a nutshell, can you talk a little bit about the services you provide and the types of customers you tend to have?
Absolutely. So we endeavor to help anyone, certainly anyone in our community. But we have three types of clients. This is kind of how we think about them in our own minds. We have clients we call our prosper clients, which are people that are using their income to generate assets maybe that they can use to retire off of later. And for those clients, we do things like budgeting, Roth IRAs, help them with get their estate plans set up, insurance, a lot of organization and strategizing. We have a separate type of client. Maybe they're a little bit further along their financial journey. We call them our venture clients. They already have assets, and they're typically using their assets to generate income now so that they don't have to work. And those, there we're managing their, we're doing portfolio rebalances. We're advising them on how much of, when and how much stocks they should own, or what types of stocks, whether they should be invested internationally or not, or what types of bonds they should own. And we're doing a deeper dive just in the asset management piece. And then our third type of client would be a corporation or a small business, and we're helping them with their 401ks, their group benefits, and helping them to make decisions or teach them a little bit about finance in a formal capacity so that they can make better management decisions for their own enterprises.
Got it. And, one thing that strikes me about you is, you, I think, have said before on the show that you kind of nerd out on the economy, right? And you've got all the accreditations. If you take a look at Eric Waggoner with 2 Gs on, say, LinkedIn, you'll see his name followed by the alphabet soup of all of these continuing ed credits that you're probably having to spend a small fortune on. But what has always impressed me about you is your discipline to continue education and knowledge. And I think that really is great. And I follow you pretty closely on LinkedIn. And so on today's show, I wanted to kind of talk about a couple of things that you've posted in recent, weeks, and maybe have you expand on it, because I think in this time of uncertainty, having thought leadership, and again, there are people who want to learn about all kinds of stuff, and that's kind of why the show exists. But if anyone's interested and worried maybe about their financial outlook, or trying to figure out, where the puck is going as opposed to where the puck is that you're skating towards, I just want to introduce you as a great thought leader. So, on LinkedIn and maybe other platforms, you talked about, student loans share the top spot among American consumer debt with auto loans, which is why the resumption of student loan payments stands to impact the economy in 2 ways: less consumer spending, which is bad, and lower government deficits, which is good. Can you help us unpack that and maybe even back up a little bit and go higher above as to what's driving some of that information?
Yeah, so the theme in the market these days, and it's a familiar one to most people, is inflation.
Yep.
And where inflation comes from people consuming from an imbalance of consumption and production.
Okay.
So another way to put that would be people eat. There needs to be a balance between how much people eat and how much people cook.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
Now, you can have an imbalance. For instance, Thanksgiving dinner, my grandmother cooked a lot, and I ate a lot and watched a lot of football.
Yep.
And we have people in our society that they can't produce, for instance, kids, but they still need to consume. They still need to eat.
Okay.
Elderly people, people with serious disabilities. And so, but when you have too much of an imbalance of consumption versus production, then you get inflation. So the way to think about that is think about store shelves. If you go to the grocery store, if you have too many people taking things off those shelves, but they're not putting things back on those shelves, then the shelves eventually become empty and the prices go, sky high for the things that are left.
Yep.
So that's what causes inflation, not money printing. People typically think it's money printing, but if money printing caused inflation, then we would have gotten a lot of inflation when we printed a lot of money in 2008. But we didn't, because we were in a belt tightening mode already. We were in a deep, we were going into a deep recession. We had real structural problems. So we printed a lot of money, and that actually helped us. But during COVID, that was something new for all of us to work through. No one really knew how that was going to turn out. And so just as an emergency stopgap, the Federal Reserve printed a lot of money just to make sure that we could all get through that. Well, it turned out that during the financial crisis of 2008, we had a financial sickness. So we took financial medicine, we got better. But during COVID, we had a physical sickness. So the financial medicine didn't help us. So what ended up happening is the government printed a lot of money. They mailed it to us. Right?
Literally. Yep.
Literally mailed it to us. And they had all these emergency stopgaps to make sure that people didn't suffer too much during that period. But it turned out that it was either the wrong medicine or at least too much of the right medicine. And what it did is it caused people to have the ability to spend but not produce.
Okay.
Now, nature doesn't like that very much because that has to be balanced in the end. And so nature's way of dealing with that, if we don't deal with it, is inflation. Inflation is a mechanism which makes us all work harder for the same stuff.
Okay.
Right? And it's not the way we would want to deal with things because it affects us all evenly, and we don't all evenly have the ability to deal with it. For instance, the most vulnerable people in our society are really hurt by inflation, whereas the wealthiest people are not. So the Federal Reserve says, well, we got to do something different. There's a different way to deal with that, and that's just to make things voluntarily tougher on everybody. Okay.
Okay.
And so that's what's going on. So that's the theme of what's happening in the economy. So here I made this post about we had this emergency stopgap that in order to make things easier for people, we suspended their student loan payments.
Right. Yep.
Well, one person, that's great because then they could spend things elsewhere. They could spend their money elsewhere. But one person's spending is another person's income. So that's why I said less. So now when we resume student loan payments, that's going to suck money out of the economy. That's what the Federal Reserve wants. It's going to make things tougher for a person, and
to inspire them to work harder.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Very diplomatic way to put it. To inspire them to work harder.
Yep.
Yes. So that's the part that you and I probably don't like. Yeah, we got to work harder, but we don't get anything more for it.
Right.
So that's one way that policy is sucking money out of the economy. So I said that was bad. But on the flip side of that, we all have a vested interest that the government be healthy as well. And the government printed a lot of money, and it's in a really tight spot right now. Our debt to GDP is 120%. That's very high. We shouldn't have that unless we're at war.
Okay.
We're running federal deficits of 5 to 7%. So the government needs money. And it's getting to the end of what it can pull off by just money printing alone.
Right.
So what's happening here is the resumption of student loan payments is pulling money out of the consumer's hands, but it's putting it into the government's hands and helping them to shore up their own budget. So I said that's good.
Got it. Okay. Fascinating. There's a lot there, and but I like the way you explain all of that. Another thing that you posted, you said real GDP grew at an annualized rate of 4.9% in Q3 of 2023. That's a hot number.
Yeah, smoking hot.
Well, why? Tell me what it means.
Oh, man.
And what kind of indicator is that for the layperson?
Okay, so a typical number would be 2 to 2.5%.
Okay.
So we're running at double the pace of growth that we would normally see. So that is a smoking hot number. And this should be perplexing to most people, right? Because you've heard nothing but recession talk for the last 2 years, but there's been no recession, right? It's the recession that never happened. Now,
right.
That doesn't mean that the next one around the corner might not come. But certainly, if you talk about a recession for 2 years and it doesn't happen, then you were just wrong, right?
Because usually in a recession, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too deeply, but I think of runaway inflation, but then you also have usually high unemployment.
Yeah.
And the fact that we don't have high unemployment, I mean, we have like record low unemployment. Is that the disparity that makes this not a recession in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, it is, because if you think about the way that we put it at the beginning of the show here, the Federal Reserve is making people work harder. Now, you and I are sadder, because we have to work harder.
Right.
But as a group, if we're all working harder, we're all being more productive, we're all producing more, and that's why you're seeing sky-high GDP numbers for the economy as a whole. And that's why our companies, this is important for anyone investing in stocks, that's why our companies are so healthy. I mean, and particular types of companies have been really healthy, particularly the mega cap techs.
Got it. Okay. And GDP, gross domestic product, and that is a accumulation of what?
Everything that we work with, that we build, that we do. It's just every productive thing that we do, all in total. But
I mean, so the stock market's not on fire, right? I mean, it's been kind of in that 33 to 35,000 range. If I'm not
on the Dow.
Yeah, on the Dow. Yep. So help me as a layperson unpack the difference, right? So GDP's through the roof. Why wouldn't the market be on fire?
Yeah, so you see a dichotomy in the market right now. So as we sit here today,
Yep.
The S&P 500 is, if you look at it on a market cap weighted basis, okay, it's up 13.5%. But if you look at it on an equal weight basis, it's not up at all. It's 0%. Roughly.
Okay.
Okay, so if you invest in the biggest 500 companies in the country, there's two ways to invest. You can give everyone, if you had $500, and you could just give each company $1.
Yep.
And that's called equal weighting.
Okay.
But another way to do it is to just give the biggest companies the most money. So for instance, you give Apple $8 of your 500, and
Yep.
then you give small companies 20 cents.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you tilt towards the big companies, then the S&P 500 looks really good. It's got double-digit returns, and we're at 13.5% or something right now through the year. But if you look at the companies as a whole, most of them are really flat. And why you're seeing that discrepancy is because the biggest companies don't have debt, but the average companies do. And the smaller the company, the more it's likely to be debt finance versus equity finance. The point there, though, is that the Federal Reserve is doing three things to make life tougher for you and me. They're burning money. Okay, they're just setting it on fire. Really, what they do is they delete it. Okay, they've deleted more money than has ever been deleted, or close to it, and it's certainly at a faster pace, over $1 trillion.
Where's that number even measured?
It's the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, and it's not that much more complicated than just deleting it.
Okay.
I mean, they don't actually print money. They just type new numbers into the system, and they don't actually burn money. They just delete it. So they've removed money, and a lot of people don't understand that. So I'd love to, if you want to, it's one of my favorite topics. But so they've been getting. So we will get inflation if prices are high, and prices are high if people buy things, and people will buy things if they have money in the bank. So the Federal Reserve is burning that. They will also buy things if they have credit. Maybe they don't have money in the bank, but they will also buy things if they have credit.
Okay.
So the Federal Reserve is saying, okay, well, we'll deal with that. We'll raise interest rates so that banks won't have an incentive to even lend to you.
Right.
And so that's
or you'll second guess your thoughts on borrowing because it's so expensive.
Certainly will slow down.
Right. Yep.
Right. And the last thing, So that already explains the difference between what you're seeing with the biggest companies and the smallest companies. The smallest companies are debt finance, which means that they got their money to start their businesses from banks. And as time goes on, we all might have low interest rate mortgage rates right now are at 8%, but a lot of us aren't too worried about that because we still have our legacy 3% mortgages.
Right, and I hear a lot of people anecdotally saying, I was going to maybe make a change, get something bigger, get something smaller, but then I'm going to reset my clock and now I'm going to lose my 2.1 and get my 8.6 or whatever it's going to be. And so I'm going to choose to stand pat for now until I feel more comfortable.
That's right. And we all have 30-year or 15-year mortgages, but debt for companies usually rolls at about a 5-year pace.
Okay.
So these companies are very much in the same situation. The smaller companies are in the same situation that people are. They have debt, and it's being rolled at higher and higher rates. And so that's putting the squeeze on them. And that's causing them to have to abandon their growth projects or lay off their least productive people, which is really what the Federal Reserve wants. So that's why you see a split between the biggest companies and most of the other companies. Most of the other companies are really feeling the impact now of these higher interest rates. So
Got it.
GDP's high, top companies are doing great. Most companies are really trying to figure it out right now.
Got it. Okay. Another quote. The 60/40 portfolio had one of its worst years ever in 2022. Contrary to popular belief, it hasn't always been a winner. Target date funds should rethink their strategy. Dividend-paying stocks provide an anti-correlation to the broader market in 2022. Bonds did not.
Yeah.
What the hell does that mean?
Well,
60/40.
And I want to tread
stocks and bonds?
Yeah, I want to tread carefully. So yeah, when you say a 60/40 portfolio, that's financial advisor or stock picker parlance for 60% of your portfolios in stocks, 40% of your portfolios in bonds. But sometimes people do things and they forget why they do them.
Yep.
Right? And the reason that we came up with this idea of having 60% of your portfolio in stocks and 40% of your portfolio in bonds, the idea was that you put your risky money in stocks.
Okay.
And you put your safer money in bonds. So often, and there have been plenty of times in the past when bonds represented a I won't say riskless return, but people would say that, a riskless return. If it's not riskless, it's never riskless. Few things ever are.
Yep.
I don't want to portray it like that. But that was kind of the general idea, that bonds were certainly a less risky idea. So it represented riskless return. But what's happened in the last, 10, 20 years is that bonds, that idea is kind of, when interest rates have been so low, then bonds, instead of being, generally riskless return, they've become more like returnless risk.
Yep.
Because
Okay.
there is risk in bonds. And if you don't get paid for it, then it's just not a very fair deal. And I don't think bonds have been, they just haven't been in the last couple of years what they used to be. So what you saw, so the reason that you own these things in those combinations and in those amounts is the idea is that when one goes down, the other one will go up because they're anti-correlated. So if stocks go down, bonds go up, and that happens a lot. If bonds go down, stocks go up, but you're always holding something that's a winner, and you're always usually holding something that's a loser. But that didn't happen in 2022. Everything, almost everything was a loser. And there was a point when we looked at the market when the S&P was down about 28%, and on the same day, the Vanguard long-term bond index was down like 30%. So owning a portfolio of stocks and bonds didn't help you at all. It didn't save you from the risk, right? And we made the observation that if you had if you carved out dividend-paying stocks, which were still stocks and they aren't bonds, they gave you the qualities or the features in 2022 that you would have liked to have gotten from bonds but didn't get. They paid you a nice dividend income, and they even went up when everything else went down. So that's why I made that comment that, if you and I want to get to Detroit, a real bad way to do that would be to point our cars directly at Detroit and just floor it.
Right. Right.
You got
stuff.
You got to steer.
Right.
You got to make adjustments. And so a lot of people are holding target date funds in their 401k plans, and target date funds are a form of autopilot.
Okay.
You say, this is the date I'm gonna retire, and then I expect that they will just manage my stocks and bonds, based on that target date. But I think that if you're steering, you might have decided that the old ideas about how much bonds what portion of your portfolio should be in bonds, you probably would rethink that.
Got it. Well, I want to give a nod to one of our sponsors. When it comes to creating commercial and residential spaces, there's no one I trust than my friends at Forsberg Real Estate. Brent Forsberg and his team take a holistic approach to creating an environment that suits your needs while creating a foundation for a prosperous community. Since the 1950s, Brent Forsberg has been a name to trust if you're looking at a partner on a project, occupy a great space to live or work, or simply follow one of the great thought leaders of our state. Reach out to my friends at Forsberg Real Estate Company by calling 517-349-9330 or check out their website at lansingrealestate.com. You won't regret it. So let's do one more. You talked about buying versus renting. Wall Street Journal reports that the average monthly new mortgage payment is 52% higher than the average apartment rent, according to CBRE. The premium last peaked at 33% in the second quarter of 2006. Talk about why that's important.
I find this to be one of the more interesting and fascinating things that's occurring in the market right now. And it's certainly one of the tougher questions that we get from our clients. A lot of our clients will say, should I buy a house right now?
Right. Yep.
Our price is going up or down. And really, they've been in a deadlock. We've got it's really a battle of the titans.
Yep.
On the one hand, we have the Federal Reserve raising interest rates. So mortgage rates are up at 8% or near 8% on 30-year mortgages. And that should be a huge driver of falling house prices. If you just told me that, I would say, oh, home prices are going to fall through the floor.
Right.
Okay. Because people can't pay that.
Right.
Can't afford that. But on the other hand, because of the impact of the money printing, what has happened is the people that would otherwise be nailing boards together.
Yep.
Right? Nobody does tough jobs unless they have to. Right? There are just some jobs in our economy that unless someone has to do them, they won't do them unless they need the money incentive. And if they don't have the money incentive, they won't do them. They won't clean toilets. They won't bathe elderly people. And there's not a lot, you see less manual labor. Because of that, no one built any houses.
Right.
So now the supply of new homes that are available for purchase is really low, because we just haven't been building for the last 10 years.
Right.
And so that, when there's less supply, that drives prices up. So you really have this, it's almost like how you have like a fault line, earthquakes are caused when like these two tectonic plates or something.
Correct.
They have a lot of tension and they shift. That's kind of what's happening in the housing market. You have these two big forces, and they're both acting in opposing directions, and they just are right now. We're just getting tremors, but the prices haven't gone up and they haven't gone down, and I find this to be one of the unexpected aspects of what's going on in the market. You would have expected home prices to fall. But I would make a point, though, for anyone that's looking to purchase a home, that as long as prices aren't high, you can buy a home, right? And if you get a mortgage rate of 8%, you might not like that. It might not be your favorite, but you can always refinance that mortgage later.
Right.
So
when the numbers come down. Right.
Yeah. So I would just say that if you're looking to buy a home, those two competing forces are not even. You might be well served to go ahead and buy it.
Got it. Well, Eric, we could talk for hours, but we are up against the clock, and I just want to thank you for being here. And for the listeners, I hope, you learn something, right? Because it's all just fascinating information. I don't care what your role in this society is, how money works, and what things are going on that you probably need to pay attention to. This is rewarding information to get. So I appreciate you coming in, Eric. We've been talking with the managing partner for Waggoner Financial, Mr. Eric Waggoner. Give everyone a reminder as to how they can get in touch with you to learn more. Well, you can always go to our website, waggoner-financial.com. So, or you can call our office, 517-853-3367. And of course, anyone can always just call me on my cell phone. I'm happy to talk to anybody. I love talking about money. Right on. So Eric Waggoner, find him on LinkedIn too to share more of these statistics that just make you start thinking. So thank you very much for joining me, Eric. Thanks for having me, Chris.